evening. Welcome to Boston College and to this evening's lecture, The Promise of Boundless Compassion, an evening with Father Greg Boyle. My name is Jane Regan, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education for the School of Theology and Ministry. Our Dean, Mark Massa, extends his greetings and apologizes for not being here tonight as he's traveling for school business. The evening is sponsored by the School of Theology and Ministry and the Church in the 21st Century Center. For those of you who are new to the STM programs, let me take a moment to tell you a bit about us. The STM was formed in June of 2008, bringing together Boston College Institute for Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry with the Weston Jesuit School of Theology to form one school that granted graduate degrees for both lay people and those going for ordination and those already ordained prepare for ministry. In addition, we have a third branch of the School of Theology and Ministry called Continuing Education, which grants non-credit education opportunities, both on campus, such as this evening, as well as online with our C21 online courses. More information about the School of Theology and Ministry, as well as about C21 online, is available near the entrance. Now, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Father Greg Boyle. A native of Los Angeles, Greg Boyle entered the Order of the Society of Jesus after graduation from high school and was ordained a priest in 1984. He holds an MA in English from Loyola Marymount University and has a Master's of Sacred Theology and a Master of Divinity degrees from Weston. Since Weston Jesuit has joined us here at Boston College, we like to think of him as one of our alums. From 1986 through 1992, Father Boyle served as pastor of Dolores Mission in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles, and there began to address an escalating problem and unmet needs of gang-involved youth. In 1988, he created the program Jobs for a Future, and with the community developed positive alternatives, including the establishment of an elementary school, a daycare program, and finding legitimate employment for young adults. As a response to the civil unrest in August of 1992, Father Greg launched Homeboy Bakery, the first business under Jobs for the Future, with a mission to provide training, work experience, and above all, the opportunity for rival gang members to work side by side. The success of that bakery set the groundwork for additional businesses, which in 2001 took the form of an independent nonprofit organization, Homeboy Industries. Now located in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, Homeboy Industries is recognized as the largest gang intervention and re-entry program in the country. Today, Homeboy Industries businesses have expanded to include Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Diner at Los Angeles City Hall, Homeboy Farmers Market, Homeboy Silkscreen and Embroidery, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, and Homegirl Cafe and Catering. Father Boyle serves as the executive director of Homeboy Industries, and this past January was named the King Chavez Parks Visiting Professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan. On a national level, Father Boyle is a consultant to youth services and governmental agencies, policymakers, and employers, focusing on the importance of adult attention, guidance, and unconditional love in preventing youth from joining gangs. Father Greg's book, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, was published in 2010, and I saw many copies of it in people's hands on the way in. It has since been come out in paperback and audiobook. Tattoos on the Heart has received a long list of honors, including being named one of the best books of 2010 by Publishers Weekly. The Boston College Bookstore is selling the book in the lobby at a 20% discount, and Father Greg has graciously agreed to sign the books after the presentation. Father Greg has received numerous awards and accolades on behalf of Homeboy and for his work with former gang members. His awards include the 2009 award from the Los Angeles Headquarters Association, naming him as one of the city's leading visionaries responsible for changing the face of Los Angeles, and his induction in the 2011 California Hall of Fame, as well as awards for peacemaking, for leadership, for building neighborhoods, humanitarian awards, and various honorary doctorate degrees. In short, Greg Boyle's life work has been transformative for adults, for neighborhoods, for the city of Los Angeles, and has become a national and international model. So please join me in a warm welcoming Father Greg Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. If anyone were ever to question the Catholic character of Boston College, they'd need to only look at the front row and see that nobody's sitting there. So, Catholic. It's a privilege to be here. I have been here a few times. It's a great privilege to be with so many friends. Kara Gould, who worked for me for 10 years, a graduate of Boston College, and Big Mike, who's a great friend, and my hero, Richard Martinez, who's a sophomore here from the barrio. I apologize because I've spoken, here, I guess, a number of times, and so maybe people have heard me, and it always freaks me out a little bit, although some of you, I think, have been forced to read my book by Stephen Pope and some other people, so maybe you haven't heard me, and that's good. That makes me feel better. The president goes to lots of cities and says Ramnesia all over. It keeps saying that, so I can say my stories, I guess, so that's not a diss. I'm voting for him, but So it happens sometimes. I was in Davenport, Iowa recently, and I thought, great, I've never been there in my life. No one will have ever heard me. Well, then you discover, that YouTube is the bane of your existence. That, oh, I heard that story before. Oh, I've heard that. That's my favorite. And I go, God, So once I was at a foster grandparent gathering, a huge gathering in Southern California, and I had spoken at it the summer before, and I don't know why they invited me again, but they did. And so there I was after this talk, and there was a foster grandmother, who bumped into me, and I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed my hands, and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. So, kind of hoping she misspoke there. Folks on the margins are just hoping that we might notice them. And I think that's sort of the way it always goes. I had a very earnest 16-year-old gang member stand in front of my desk not long ago, and he looked at me and he said, look, I need your divided attention. And I said, well, you are in luck, because that's exactly what you'll be getting today. So, I think there's a vision that brings you here that has little to do with me or extra credit for Steve Pope's class, I think it has to do with, in the end, you took your time to walk in here because, you want the world to look differently than it currently looks, and good for you. There's a vision that drives us always in everything that we do. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But none of us want to wait for too long con los brazos cruzados, tapping our feet and staring at our watches. We want to make something happen. And what I want to suggest to you in the brief time I have with you is that what in fact we want to make happen is the creation and formation of a community of kinship such that God in fact might recognize it. How do we together imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we seek together to dismantle the barriers that exclude? How do we inch our way out to the edges of those margins? And by standing there, the margins get erased. And so we stand with people, very particular folks, the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied. We stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while, we have this great privileged moment where we get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I don't think that's my call. I think that's our invitation as members of the human race. And I think that if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We would, in fact, be celebrating it. So for over 25 years, it's been the privilege of my life to work with gang members in Los Angeles, and my life has been changed radically and utterly because of it, and the homies have taught me everything of value, but in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and I just could not be more grateful to them. I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, and so, and I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately, and so there I am with two homies, Manuel and Poncho, older vatos who've been to prison and who do a variety of things at Homeboy, and they're going to help me give a talk at a high school in Palm Desert. It's about 2 hours from LA. So the day begins sort of at 9 in LA at Homeboy Industries of 400 employees, and so the three of us leave at 9. And we're only 15 minutes on the road when Manuel, who's in shotgun, the front seat, he gets an incoming text, and he kind of reads it, and he chuckles to himself. And I said, well, what is it? And he goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I'd just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazote as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel work in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our workers. It's a tough job, actually. And I said, well, what's he say? Oh, gosh, it's dumb. Hang on, let me find it. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, like we nearly drove into oncoming traffic, and we died laughing, the three of us. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we seek together to obliterate the illusion that we are separate? That there is an us and a them? How do we bridge the gulf that exists so that there is no longer daylight that separates us? We have to be careful, I think, on something like this, because even in service, there's a distance, almost by definition. Service provider, service recipient. We want to bridge even that distance. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth is, we all need healing. All of us. Our cry for help, it's the thing that sort of joins us. So service is a starting point, and everybody in this room is engaged in it in one way or another. But you don't want to get stuck there, because it's only a starting point. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. That's where you want to land. And the ballroom is the place of kinship, the place where there is no us and them, and everything has been bridged in this exquisite mutuality. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And I remember once that a reporter commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and he smiled and he said, "The feeling's mutual." And that's what we hope for, this kind of mutuality where there is no distance, really. I remember there was a homie named Caesar. Nobody found more jobs through Homeboy Industries than Caesar. And kind of a knucklehead. I knew him growing up in the projects where I was pastor, and he got into a gang, and very smart kid, dangerous sense of humor always. And but there was a period of his life in the early 20s, his 20s, when he would come to the office and I'd hire him or find a job in the private sector, but he'd always sort of gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And it was frustrating because then he'd get popped and he'd leave again and then he'd come back. Well, this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch, a probation violation in county jail, and sure enough, there he is again sitting in front of me. And he says what homies often say, "This time it'll be different." And I go, all right. So I pick up the phone and I call a friend of mine who owns a vending machine company in Alhambra, California. And just as he had hired homies before, I asked him if he wouldn't mind hiring Caesar this time. And he said, yeah, to send him, he'll start tomorrow. So Caesar went to begin work at this vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in the seat in front of me. And I go, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go again." But this time he pulls out this check, and it's his first paycheck from the company. And he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me. And my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, who?" And he looked at me strangely and he said, "Well, God, of course." "Oh, yeah, no, that's right. That would be God, yeah." He said, "You thought I was going to say you." I said, "No, gosh, God's number one." He said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." And I'm sorry, them Genesis days? And he said, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now." Well, we just, the two of us, we just dissolved in laughter, and I don't know. You tell me, who's the service provider? Who's the service recipient? It's mutual. Lately, I've had this thing where reporters have asked me, I had a PBS kind of guy doing a documentary, and he ended the thing by saying, "So, how's it feel to have saved so many thousands of lives?" And I said, I don't mean to be cute or anything, but I don't really know what you're talking about. And that feels like the truest thing to say. I think saving lives is for the Coast Guard. I only know this for sure, that every day that I show up, my life gets saved. That when I'm impatient, or I need patience, that the homies save me from my impatience. When I lack courage, the homies rescue me from my cowardice. When I'm utterly convinced of the rightness of my position, the homies douse me with a big-ass cold bucket of humility. we work out our salvation together. It's not about service provider, service recipient, the one who saves and the one who gets saved. The same reporter said, you've been a mentor to thousands of young men and women. Who have been your mentors? And I go, honest to God, these thousands of young men and women. The interview didn't go well, now that I think of it. I'm not sure I was ever giving him what he wanted, but that's sort of the way it works. Lately the homies have been asking me for my blessing, and I can't recall that this happened so much before. In all the probation camps, juvenile halls, and jails, you get that. Somebody will say, give me a blessing, but the homie's been doing this a lot lately, probably in the last 3 years, in the parking lot in front of the office, in the reception area in my office. And they never say, Father, may I have your blessing? They always say, hey, G, give me a bless, yeah. They always say it that way with every single one of those elements, AG, give me a bless, yeah. So I had this one kid named Chris, 18 years old, who works for me at Homeboy Industries. The work is too strong a verb for sure, but... And Chris is kind of famous for, he's always quejándose, and he's a bien pediche, quejando means he's complaining all the time, and pediche, he's always asking me for feria, always asking me for money, and I brace myself whenever I see him, because the lineup is coming, and it was a Friday, and I say, oh my God, here we go, here comes Chris. And Chris is always complaining, my check is short, and my case manager gave me the runaround, and my supervisor came at me sideways, and it's like, oh my God, here we go. But I always have kind of a level of understanding with this kid, because he's one of our orphans. We have so many of them. A kid who was who raised himself, and kids aren't supposed to be good at that, and kind of lived on other people's couches, and parents had abandoned him long ago, so I have a special kind of place, I suppose. But anyway, I brace myself for him. He comes in, and Chris doesn't disappoint. He just quejándose and pediche are us. And so when he finishes, he goes, hey, G, give me a bless, yeah. All right, so he knows the drill. So he comes around my side of the desk, and he very devoutly bows his head and closes his eyes, and I put my hands on his shoulders. And I close my eyes. Well, his birthday was the day before, so this gives me an opportunity to say some things. And I go, Chris, I am so glad that you were born and that you came into this world. I'm a rich man because you're in my life, and I'm so proud to call you son. Even though, and I don't know why I added this last part, even though at times you can be a huge pain in the ass. And he looks up and he smiles and he says, the feeling's mutual. And yeah, it is, And kind of that's where we're meant to be. I never felt this more keenly in my own life. I've struggled with some health issues and had cancer and leukemia and went through chemotherapy and feeling pretty good at the moment, or as the homies still say to me, I hear your cancer's in intermission. I said, yes, apparently it stepped out to the lobby to buy some popcorn. May the line be long. But this news was announced on the front page of the Sunday LA Times, so word spread quickly, even in the gang world, and so folks came out of the woodwork. And I remember a homegirl named China left me a message on my voicemail. Now it's our turn to take care of you. Very sweet. Big, huge homie named Grumpy, 6'4", a linebacker standing in front of my desk, big tears in his eyes, and apparently God had forgotten to give him a neck, and he says, what do I have that you need? Meaning organs. So happy to tell him I didn't need any of his organs, but it was the thought that counted. One of my favorites was a little 15-year-old knucklehead gang member who came late to this discovery. And I would always want to come back to the office after chemo. I never wanted to go home. So even if I had 2 hours before the closing of the day. So I'd go to St. Vincent's Hospital, be hooked up to chemo from 8 in the morning to 3, and the homies always wanted to drive me there and then to pick me up, and come to think of it, that really was more harrowing than chemo itself. I hadn't thought of that. But so I came home this one day, and then so this kid came in, little 15-year-old, and he plunks himself down, and I hear you have leukemia. I said, yeah, I do. And there's this awkward silence. My cat had leukemia. Yeah, she died. Oh gosh, I am so sorry to hear that. Awfully glad you stopped by, just picked me right up there. Well, my all-time favorite came from a homie named Crazy Ace, who called me from jail, collect, and he had just read this in the Sunday LA Times. Hey, what's up with this leukemia anyway? I said, well, it's cancer. It's in the blood. The doctors say my white count's too high. These doctors, they don't be knowing nothing. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, hello, of course your white count's high. Well, you might call that a second opinion, but I've decided to call it kinship, that we're in this together. And what would happen if we imagined lives not our own? For there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it, and the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? So Homeboy Industries was born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, together they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, making it, according to the LAPD, the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So if LA was the gang capital of the world, which it still happens to be, then my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. I didn't know this when I arrived. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 185th 2 weeks ago. A young man named Angel, who I'd known him since he was a little kid. So we did a lot of things in those days, but the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age kids who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. And so they were young gang members wreaking havoc in the projects. They were selling drugs, they were violent, they were writing on the walls. So I walked out to them and I said, if I found a school for you, that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand a little bit. So I remember going to the nuns who occupied the convent, which was on the 3rd floor of the elementary school. And I went to them and I said, would you mind ever so much, like leaving the convent? And it shouldn't surprise you because nuns sisters in this country are amazing. And they said, sure. So we found them a house, and we started a school for gang members, and that brought gang members in large numbers to Dolores Mission. And that kind of was a challenge because it was upset the apple cart a little bit, because aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, good people in, bad people out? And so that was a good challenge, actually. And then the homie said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, we marched all around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we couldn't wait any longer. And then shortly after the unrest in Los Angeles in 1992, I asked a movie producer if he would buy this old abandoned bakery across the street from the church. It was an 80-year-old building, and he thought it was a good idea, so he did. He bought it. We called it Homeboy Bakery, and we had enemies, rivals, work side by side baking bread. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA, kind of a historic area. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture, you know. And not everything worked, and I will be the very first person to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing was really not a huge success. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now we didn't intend to become this. Nobody intends to become this, but we evolved and backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the country. You don't set out to do that, and you probably don't want to become that, but that it happened. So you name just about anything that might be helpful for this population, and we try to offer it, and mainly by listening, so we find out from gang members what would help. There are 1,100 gangs in LA County, 120,000 gang members. I just spoke in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota yesterday, or whatever it was, 2 days ago. And we have 40,000 more gang members than they have people, you know. So it's really a daunting, complex social dilemma. So we offer everything from anger management to grief and loss to parenting to you name whatever curricular thing. So of our 250 workers, trainees, they all have to take classes. They work them out with their case manager. Everybody has a case manager. We have lots of therapists. We have 5 paid therapists, and we have something like 43 volunteer therapists. So everybody's in therapy. We sell our chips and salsas in a huge chain in Los Angeles called Ralph's. We have 5 mini farms that produce produce for all our catering and restaurants. Homeboy Diner is the only place you can get food in the city hall. By December, I hope, if you fly American Airlines and you land in LAX, you can walk by one of our brand new restaurant there. What else? Solar panel installation training program, very successful program, where the homies get nationally certified to install solar panels. Homeboy Bakery is still existent. Homeboy Homegirl merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. Homeboy Silkscreen. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. So some time ago, Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton showed up for lunch. She of the Academy Award for Annie Hall, and she's in the Godfather movies, big movie star. And so she shows up for lunch with a regular, a guy who's there once a week. And, you know, her waitress this day is a woman named Glenda. And Glenda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison, felon, parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, oh, I'll have that second one. That one sounds good. And it's at that moment that Glenda looks at her and says, wait a minute, I feel like I know you from somewhere. I don't know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton, you know, decides to deflect it humbly. You know, oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Yeah, that just took my breath away when I heard it. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind, and what is on God's mind. I think we need go no further than to what Jesus says to us, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but it's about us, that you may be one. This is God's agenda. And that's the hope, is that we'll be faithful to that invitation. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, calls enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. You don't hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just show up and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, especially on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But occasionally you have to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep folks from seeing that truth. Marcus Borg, the great scripture scholar, says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture, of course, is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. You know, lately I've been taking this leisurely stroll through the Acts of the Apostles. So I read like a couple paragraphs a day. And I suppose you could read that thing as a quaint snapshot of the earliest Christian community, or you could read it as the measure of health of any community. And you'll just see these things will leap off the page. See how they love one another. That's a good one. In this community, there's nobody who's needy. There's another. My favorite is this one. And awe came upon everyone. That it would seem that the measure of our health as a community resides in our ability to experience awe. And in particular, to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So a year ago, I guess, I was invited to Richmond, Virginia to give a kind of an all-day training on gangs to 600 social workers. So I brought 2 homies with me, Andre, African-American gang member who at the time worked in my retail store, and Jose, who at the time was a member of our kind of substance abuse team, a man solidly in recovery himself, a trainee who had moved up through the ranks from janitorial to washing windows to now using his gift of healing in the recovery department, which is a huge issue at Homeboy. A gang member, tattooed, been to prison, but had long stretches of time homeless and also as a heroin addict, even longer time as that. So I'd never heard their stories, and since it was an all-day training, I said, talk, because we had to fill the whole day. So Jose got up there, and I'd never heard his story, and he began kind of in in kind of a self-effacing, very humble way. He goes, I guess you could say that my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I guess I was 6 when she walked up to me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, the whole audience gasped. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And people did what you did. I guess I was 9 when my mom drove me to the deepest part of Baja California. She walks me up to an orphanage, and she says, I found this kid. She left me there for 3 months until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. But kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he chokes back his tears at this point and he stops speaking. He seems to be staring at a piece of his story that only he can see. I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. When we want to roll up our sleeves and address the things that are complex, everything is dependent on our diagnosis. In fact, nobody has ever met a healthy treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. Never. I would say that's never happened in the history of the world. I went to a doctor who I don't go to anymore, and he thought I had mono. So he treated me for mononucleosis for a year. And I think we can agree that there's a difference between mono and leukemia. But a bad diagnosis is never neutral. It puts you behind the 8 ball, you know. You lose time. It's costly. You want to get the diagnosis right. And that's important. Nobody in this room or outside of it has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. That's never happened before. Hopeful kids don't join gangs. If we think it's about good kids and bad kids, then boy, is our diagnosis wrong. I was channel surfing the other night. I can't even believe a show like this is still on TV. There's a Scared Straight thing. I just couldn't watch it. Really? Did you think kids just weren't scared enough? Really? So there I am on the Dr. Phil show. I know, what was I thinking? Seemed like a good idea, but so he was going to give the whole hour to Homeboy and talk about my book. And so we thought we had talked the producers down from doing something crazy. And so there I am backstage, and it's a room half the size with an audience half the size. And it's a live audience, but it's a tape show. So I can hear Dr. Phil. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the founder and executive director of Homeboy Industries, Father Greg Boyle. So I walk out there to my horror. In the middle of the stage is Phil sitting in his stool. Next to him is my empty stool awaiting me. But on his side of the stage is a beautiful mahogany coffin on one of those 4-wheel dolly deals. On my side of the stage is a perfectly reconstructed jail cell with bars and bed and sink and toilet. They went to great expense here. Well, you already know where this is going to go. So the producers have flown out 3 young kids, males, African American, Latino, and white, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there, kids who had gravitated perilously close to some kind of gang involvement. They were flown out with their very distraught single mothers. Each one came out one at a time, and each one, Phil would kind of grab them figuratively by the lapel and say, "Don't you see where this choice is leading you? To death or to prison." Finally, by the 3rd kid, I said, "Phil, how do I break this to you? These kids know this better than we do. They know that it'll end in death or prison. They don't care whether it'll end in death or prison. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? You think kids are drawn and lured and recruited and attracted and pulled into gangs. Never. Never. Kids aren't seeking anything when they join a gang. They're always fleeing something. Just ask Jose. And the outsider view has always driven the inside of what we do, and that's too bad. Parentheses, as a priest, my church are all these detention facilities where I go on a rotating basis. 20 probation camps, which is a thing in LA County, where kids are sent from 6 months to 9 months to up to a year in a kind of a detention center. Jails, juvenile halls. So I go to these places on a rotating basis, and so I did a mass in a gym at one of these probation camps, and about 100 gang members. And so I finished mass, and I'm, taking my alb off, and homies are coming up and talking, and some guy says, "Hey, I saw you on Oprah." I say, "Well, no, actually, it was Dr. Phil." "Oh," I said, "Yeah, I have a hard time telling those two apart myself." And a kid over here said, "You were on Dr. Phil? Fighting with your wife?" Well, these guys died laughing, and I say, "Well, yeah, but, Phil really gave us really good advice, and we're doing way better now. Thank you for asking." And so we return people to themselves, and the truth be told, you get returned to yourself. That's what this is supposed to be, this exquisite mutual thing. You don't come to the rescue, you just help. We all help each other work out our own salvation. You don't help the disadvantaged. You recognize your own disadvantage in the folks who have been left out. So I've been given a lot of talks lately because I couldn't be happier that universities force their students to read my book. And so I was invited to my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane. And so I flew up there. I can't remember when this was, and I brought 2 homies with me. Bobby, who's an African-American gang member, who works in our bakery, and Mario, at the time, a guy who worked in our retail store. And how do I pick homies to go with me? I didn't bring any on this trip, but the last week I did because it was shorter. It's just too hard when I have lots of cities. But when I can do it and afford it, I always bring homies who are enemies, and so they have to share a hotel room together. And I always pick somebody who's never been on a plane before, because, I want them to have that thrilling experience. And so I've never in my life brought anybody more terrified, paniqueado de plano, of flying than this guy Mario. In my whole life, I just thought, oh my God, what have I done by inviting this guy? He was hyperventilating, he was, hee, and we hadn't gotten on the plane yet, so So we're at Burbank Airport, and he's sitting there, and, there's our plane, and the plane's coming in, early morning. And it's, Southwest, and it's big bay windows, and there's not a lot separating you. And there's no hermetically sealed chute that gets you into the plane. You go out into the tarmac, and you have the steps that lead up, and in the front of the plane, and the back of the plane. And so I see 2 flight attendants, females, schlepping up the front steps. They're on our flight crew. And they both each have huge cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're climbing up the steps this early morning. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" And I point, and I said, "Well, as soon as they sober up the pilots." There they go now. All right, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But I should tell you that Mario is this tall drink of water, just skinny, tall. But he's among the most tattooed fellows that's ever worked at our place. He's all sleeved out, and his neck is completely covered in tattoos. And his whole face, except for this little circle, which is his eyes, nose, and mouth, but everything is covered in tattoos. And so I forgot to mention that we have tattoo removal. So we have a designated clinic, with 3 laser machines. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos, so he's chipping away at his tattoos. We have like 37 volunteer doctors, 10,000 treatments a year, So if any of you are starting to regret your Bobby Valentine tattoo, just come see me afterwards. And it was all started because of a guy named Frank, who's a particular friend of Kara Gould's, and he showed up in my office 2 days after being released from Corcoran State Prison. And there he's sitting there wanting to change his life. And on his forehead, tattooed, spreading the whole thing like a billboard, is "Fuck the world." And he says, "I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, Anyway, I found a doctor who chipped away at his forehead, and now he has no sign of the angriest moment. But I digress. Mario had a lot of tattoos, so just covered in tattoos, and I'd never been in public with Mario before. So we're walking in Burbank Airport, and I'm watching people go like this, and mothers are vaguely clutching their kids a little more closely, And I'm thinking, wow, isn't that strange, And because he's the nicest, kindest, most gentle homie probably who's ever worked at Homeboy. If you were to go there and ask anybody, who's the kindest, most nicest, most gentle gang member here, they go, "Oh, Mario, of course, who works in the retail store." Just super effusive, kind, and gentle. Though the packaging, I guess, might suggest otherwise. So even on the plane, when the flight attendant hands him peanuts, and he doesn't just take them, and he doesn't just thank her. He grabs her hand, and he looks her in the eye, and he says, "Thank you so much." I'm looking at him, like he's from another planet, But he was so kind. He was like that on the whole trip, for as terrified and paniqueado as he was, So we get to Spokane, and this happens sometimes where they have the big talk at night that I'm supposed to give, but then they plan all these other, trying to get their money's worth, So they have class, talk, class, lunch, meeting, class. There are about 8 events throughout the whole day, which I didn't know about. So I told these guys, I said, "Look, I want you to, I'm going to sit in the back of the room. You give these talks, And they were a little nervous, particularly Mario. And they weren't used to telling their stories, but they got used to it. And sometimes you don't know you have a story until you start to tell it. And honest to God, listening to them, stories of abandonment and terror and abuse and torture. I mean, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So after hearing them all day, I said, "Look, I want you guys to do a little 5-minute portrait after I speak so that you can be included in the question and answer." And so there we are that night in this huge room, 1,000 people, standing room only, and I do my whatever, 50 minutes or something, and then they each come up and do 5 minutes. And they were nervous, especially Mario, but they got through it. And so, yeah, questions. And a woman over here stands, and she says, yeah, I have a question. It's for Mario. Very first question out the gate is for Mario. So he walks up to the microphone. He's just so terrified. Yes. Well, you say you're a father and that you're going to, you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closed his eyes, and he, honest to God, herniates himself trying to come up with something. And it takes him a while, and he wants to say the right thing, and he suddenly blurts out, and he stops. And he closes his eyes again, but he really wants to get this sentence out right. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman stands again, and now she's battling her own tears. And she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 strangers stand immediately, and they begin to clap, and they will not stop. And all Mario can do is just stand there holding his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had decided to return him to himself. And I think that's the only praise God has any interest in. I'm going to tell one last story, and then I'm going to invite you to ask some questions. People often ask about the dynamic of enemies working together and what that's like, and it's dicey at first, for sure. But, Homie will come in and say, I'm ready, 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 but not everybody who says, Lord, 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 will, get in, So I said, well, okay, how about this? I have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z. And I rattle off the names of enemies, rivals. And the homies always do the same thing. They think for a long-ass time, and then they go, okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them. Which used to bother me in the old days, until you discover that it's impossible for human beings to demonize people they know. Human beings just can't sustain it. So I had a homie named Youngster, a little guy who was from this one gang, and we thought he was ready, and Kara knew him. And so I bring him over to the silkscreen factory, which is kind of our biggest business, 19 years old, off campus, if you will, not connected to our headquarters. 2,500 customers, high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to Boston. So I walked this guy into the floor of this warehouse where everybody's printing shirts and there's dryers and machines and stuff. And so I watched Youngster walk to each one. There are about 30 guys working there, and he's shaking hands, and he's looking them in the eyes, and even enemies. But then, and I'm thinking to myself, how great, that he's shaking hands even with enemies. This is good, Till we get to the end, and there's a guy who seems to be wanting to avoid this encounter altogether. A kid everybody calls Puppet. So when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they hail from, but he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discovered later that this is a hatred that's really quite deep and personal, beyond which they do not think they can really get past. So I sensed that much at the moment, and so I said, look, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job. Calladitos, they don't say a word. Well, 6 months later, Puppet walks to a store some distance from his home, a corner store, and he purchases something. On the way home, he decides to take a shortcut, and he dodges into this alley. And because he's taken this detour, suddenly he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1, and they beat him badly. And he falls to the ground, and while he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds him sometime later and takes his body to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared brain dead. But it's the policy there to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours, so you can have 2 days of a flat read with no brain activity at all. So then the doctors can just sign the death certificate, making it official. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was speaking at St. Louis University. I flew home immediately. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I blessed him. I gave him la unción de los enfermos, anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected, and a week later I buried him. But in the first 24 hours after he had been beaten and he was still lying in the hospital, I'm alone in my office. It's 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silk screen. Hey, he says, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy, he was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Yeah, of course. Any exceptions? No. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. For it turns out it's mutual. For the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we can wait for it. Thank you very much.